Beautiful. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're going to have an absolutely fascinating discussion with Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, who is, in many people's estimation, the leading person in the field in the world as to how to save our oceans. And it's
Geez,
my
that's a lot of pressure.
well, it's true. When things actually are true, and you've earned it, uh, the 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 the
The
the
hyperbole.
it's hyperbole on one hand. Um, Litotes is understatement for effect. Very rarely used by politicians. Understatement for effect, but
Litotes.
litotes is understatement for effect. That's kind of like
This is
uh,
great. I was
that's
hoping to
kind of
learn
like
something new today.
it's kind of like Dr. Ayana Johnson, not a bad marine biologist. That would be litotes for effect.
She's
So
been to the ocean once.
so yeah, Sister Karita told me in the eighth grade, very rarely used by politicians, like understatement for effect.
Yeah, I love it.
Um, so so Dr. Johnson is the author of the Blue New Deal, and what she's done is she has focused on the greatest threats to the oceans of the United States and the world. And this document, which she has this plan, which she has put together, is one that was integral in the Elizabeth Warren for President campaign, but it is now something uh, that has been adopted all across our country as a blueprint for what has to be done in order to ensure that oceans are an integral part of any solution that we put in place in 2021 in the years thereafter. So it's my great honor to have Dr. Ayana Johnson with us this evening. And maybe for our thousands of people, watching right now, maybe you could outline, the Blue New Deal and
Sure.
why it's needed and what it would entail.
Yeah. Let me even start one step back, which is like, how did this come to be, right? And the sort of origin story, which is, I read the Green New Deal resolution, which I would encourage everyone to go read. Everyone thinks it's hundreds of pages. It's 14 pages, like big font, double spaced, plain English. It'll take you like 5 minutes to read it. It's on the Congress website. Just Google Green New Deal resolution. And so as I was reading it last year, I got to page 10 and I see the word ocean for the first time. And it's just like things we should protect include blah, 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 ocean. And I was like, wait a second, you guys. This is just, we can't just marginalize the entire ocean and think that we will be able to address climate change because the ocean is such a huge part of the climate system. It's obviously bearing a lot of the brunt of the impacts of climate change, but it also is a place where we should be looking for solutions. And so that was the moment a lot of my colleagues who are ocean experts had the same feeling, right? Like if we leave out the ocean, we just won't succeed. And so a lot of us started talking about this. Like, what would it look like if the ocean were actually included? Um,
So, so how does the Blue New Deal intersect with the
yeah,
concept of the Green New Deal? How do they come together?
they're totally complementary. It's just we read the Green New Deal and we're like, they're missing the ocean. There's a kind of a blue gap in the Green New Deal. So how can we sort of fill that with this complementary piece? So it's not like a competing piece of policy proposal at all. It's just saying like someone left out the ocean, like let's add that in because there's a lot of important stuff there too. So I started out by writing an op-ed with Chad Nelson, who's the CEO of Surfrider, which is the largest grassroots ocean conservation group in America. They have chapters all over the country. And Bren Smith, who's a former commercial fisherman who's now an ocean farmer, farming seaweeds and shellfish. And so the three of us got together and sort of laid out what we thought should be included if we were going to expand the concept of a Green New Deal. How could we include renewable energy? offshore? How could we include regenerative farming in the ocean? How could we include restoring and protecting coastal ecosystems and algae biofuel and all of these opportunities for how the ocean is actually trying to be a hero and it's not just a victim?
Yeah. So, so towards that goal, there's never been a specific tax break for offshore wind. And off the coast of Massachusetts, the state legislature and governor have already signed a bill that would construct 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind off the coast of Massachusetts by the year 2027. Now it's being held up inside the Trump administration right now. We have some issues
It's
we have
not
to
surprising.
resolve, but that's a perfect example of something where the fossil fuel industry would say, let's build new natural gas pipelines into New England so that we can generate electricity. We certainly wouldn't want any blackouts and brownouts. And meanwhile, off our coastline, there's 1,600 megawatts, and then another 1,600 megawatts, and then another 1,600 megawatts, capturing this wind power that blew the pilgrims to the shores of Massachusetts, blew our fishermen and our whalers in the 19th century off of our coastline, and hell, it's ready to be captured. And so that's something that Sheldon Whitehouse and I have done. We've introduced the legislation so that we would have a specific tax break for offshore wind, because you can create tens of thousands of jobs in this industry while making the planet safer and reducing the greenhouse gases from otherwise using natural gas all across New England to generate electricity.
Yeah. I think that is the most exciting unsung climate solution. We know from government reports that offshore wind could basically power most of New England, as you said, create tens of thousands of jobs, support more jobs than most of the oil and gas sector in recent years has been able to do. So this is an absolute win-win, especially when we think about how are we going to transition to renewables in a place that's as densely populated as the northeastern United States. There's in cities, there's not enough room for endless solar panels and wind turbines, but wind offshore actually blows. It's stronger and it blows more consistently than it does onshore. So it's this incredible resource. And, I know people are worried about what that means for marine life, but as a marine biologist, I also know that we know enough about the ocean that we just don't put these in places where whales are trying to migrate. We don't have to put these in sensitive habitats. There's a way to do this carefully.
Yeah. So it's unlimited potential, as you're saying. We're the Saudi Arabia of wind off the coast of New England, and it just has unlimited potential. And all you really need is like a long extension cord to bring it in 10 or 15 miles, plug it into Hyannis or Barnstable or Boston or Fall River, and we don't need more nuclear power plants. We don't need natural gas plants. We can just use this relatively guaranteed source of wind, because the further out you go is the more likely this wind's going to be blowing. Most days, all day. And we can use it in a way that absolutely deals with the threat to New England. We can talk about the whole country, but the most important environmental legal decision of all time is Massachusetts versus the EPA. And that's an April of 2007 Supreme Court decision, 5-4 decision, and with Justice Scalia writing the dissent. And this decision said that Massachusetts is right, that there is an erosion of its coastline. And if the EPA makes an endangerment finding, and they had to make an endangerment finding that the coastline was being endangered by greenhouse gases, then the EPA had to do something about it.
Yeah.
So that one case, Massachusetts versus EPA, is kind of the beginning of our legal ability to say that we're in danger along our coastline. And people don't know how long our coastline is, because we look like a small state, but when you squiggle in and out of every little coastal community, it gets to be a pretty significant distance. And the beauty of it is that we would save Massachusetts coastline by using the Massachusetts coastline and all of this wind power, all the wind power, which is there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course, the Koch brothers will go absolutely insane when we win. And then in January, we start to put these tax breaks in place.
Hmm.
Um, what I noted inside of the Blue New Deal is you talk about environmental justice as well.
Hmm.
And, uh, and I think people watching would love to hear how the Blue New Deal deals with that issue of environmental justice.
Yeah.
We did build that. We did build that into the Green New Deal.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a cornerstone of the Green New Deal resolution and thinking, which has been wonderful to see how quickly um, sort of the public and policymakers have embraced this understanding that we just have to deal with the justice elements at the same time. We can't sort of get to that later. And I'm so glad that you brought up that case, Massachusetts versus EPA, that sort of gave the Environmental Protection Agency the authority to regulate greenhouse gases, because we know, as we're in the middle of these confirmation proceedings, that like this is all, you know, this becomes at risk, right? That precedent is in danger depending on, you know, what the state of the Supreme Court looks like. So it's such an important moment to be thinking about the role that our courts play in all of this. And just kudos to you and Senator Whitehouse for having the vision to create the legislative support to champion the development of offshore wind. So thank you for that. Um, and, you know, on the justice front, it's, you know, one of the things that, you know, I sort of fleshed out this concept of a Blue New Deal in collaboration with Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, in particular with Maggie Thomas, who was her climate policy advisor. And one of the things, which will surprise you not at all, that Warren was really focused on was how can we make sure this benefits workers? How can we make sure the average person, you know, in these coastal communities where, you know, where those power lines are coming on onshore, they get a benefit from all this industry that's developing off their coasts? How can we develop something like a community benefit agreement? So some of that money goes back into the community, and it's not just big corporations offshore harvesting this wind and then what happens locally. So making sure that local residents have the opportunity for job training, to be a part of this growing industry, have the opportunity to, you know, so like some of that money goes back into the community. All of that is, you know, a lot of that can be facilitated by the way we design policy with people in mind.
Yeah, and make them union jobs
Absolutely.
and make them American jobs, because a lot of
Yep.
these companies are European and they just want to bring in their own workers and then
Yeah.
finish the job and go back again. And that just doesn't work for us
Yeah.
at the end of the day. It's going to be our wind, our ocean,
We've got a
our
lot of
electricity,
people who
right?
need jobs.
Tens of
Um,
thousands of potential jobs.
And I think the good thing about, you know, sort of, you know, all of the innovation on this that's been happening in Europe that could and should have been happening in the US if we had the proper, you know, leadership in the White House to support and champion these things, is that we have so much proof that it's effective, right? Like the United Kingdom, Germany, a lot of their energy comes from offshore wind. This is not like a maybe it'll work thing. Like it's a America catch up thing. So, so the work that you're doing to sort of like give that kick in the pants is so key, because it's not a risk. It's just a like, let's get to it.
So we were ahead in Massachusetts. We were way ahead. And this delay on Vineyard Wind has slowed us down a little bit. But in the interim, New York State has now passed a statute calling for 10,000 megawatts
Yeah.
of offshore wind.
Yeah.
And and I just think that the more we do it is the more efficient the technology is going to become. Um, the more that people will just begin to see that it can be put out so far that you don't even have to have the visual pollution that
Hmm.
was a big criticism of the Nantucket Sound Cape Wind project, and that once it happens, it's going to move very rapidly
Yeah.
because unions will be behind it, uh, and ultimately so won't coastal communities, because they'll be getting the protections which they've wanted for their beaches, for their homes, and they won't even see the wind turbines. They'll be out so
Hmm.
far. So I think we've come a long way in just a brief period of time, you know, of 10 years on this issue. So ultimately, when you think about, because you mentioned algae, you mentioned other technologies as well, what
Mhm.
is the job creation potential of a Blue New Deal?
Oh gosh, it's massive. I think because one of the things that that Governor Jay Inslee introduced is this idea of a civilian climate corps, conservation corps, right? This concept from the era of the New Deal that we could carry into the Green New Deal era and think about how can we put people back to work, especially in this time of recession that's been induced by horrible management of the coronavirus by the current administration, right? How can we put people back to work, restoring and protecting ecosystems that protect us? So, as as an ocean scientist, I know that wetlands can absorb 5 times more carbon than a forest on land. So everyone's obsessed with planting trees. We should be thinking about wetlands too, and mangroves and seagrasses, all these coastal ecosystems that provide a physical barrier from storms. They protect us oftentimes better than seawalls. So the job opportunity in restoring and protecting nature, the job opportunity in offshore wind, also offshore floating solar panels is a thing that's about to be, ready for prime time. Offshore farming of seaweeds and shellfish that actually restore seawater, um, absorb a lot of carbon dioxide and provide habitat. There are all of these things we can be doing. These are all major job creators, and it's exciting to think about New England having a new incarnation of its ocean economy, right? Massachusetts is, like you know, it's an ocean based history, right? As you described, the whaling and the fishing and the coastal towns, and of course we want to keep those seaside communities as vibrant as possible, but also safe. And so from storms and sea level rise. So thinking about all of like, how are we going to solve all these things? It's like, well, it's going to take people. These are all jobs and opportunities for making a living off the ocean in a new way.
Yeah. So as we talked, you mentioned fishing. Um, uh, so if we could talk a little bit about the fishing industry, it's taken a massive hit because of the COVID-19
Yeah.
pandemic, just absolutely critical. I was able with Elizabeth Warren to work to put $300 million into the first coronavirus relief package to help the fishing industry, Gloucester, New Bedford, and all across the country. We need to do a lot more in the next package because this crisis is not going away soon until we find a vaccine, perhaps. But we have to help the industry. But that's on top of ocean acidification. It's on top of other issues, the warming of the oceans that
Mhm.
that are dramatic. Can you talk a little bit about the Blue New Deal and all of those issues as they affect the fishing industry?
Yeah. So, um, like you said, the ocean is getting warmer and more acidic because of our changed and changing climate, right? The ocean has absorbed about a third of the carbon dioxide that we've emitted by burning greenhouse gases, and that's changed the chemistry of seawater. It's made it more acidic. We've changed the pH of the entire ocean, which is bananas to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
we've messed with something that big.
What do you mean by we've changed the pH for our viewers? What do you mean?
So, tiny chemistry lesson. So, as we burn fossil fuels, all this carbon dioxide goes up into the air. The ocean actually absorbs a lot of that, a third of it. So, we would be in much worse shape if it weren't for the ocean doing that. But as the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide, it sort of has this chemical reaction that breaks down into carbonic acid and ends up releasing hydrogen ions. And hydrogen ions are what you measure when you measure the pH of a liquid. And more
And again,
hydrogen.
pH refers to what?
pH refers to the acidity or basicness
Ah,
of the liquid. So, like lemon juice, super acidic, for example. And so the ocean is getting more acidic because of all of it's like turning into Coca Cola because of all of the um, carbon dioxide that it's absorbing. And that makes it hard for shellfish to grow their shells, right? It makes it hard for corals to grow their skeletons. And that's a big problem. And we need to stop emitting greenhouse gases because it's really messing with the balance of the seas in that way. And the oceans absorbed about 90% of the heat that we've trapped with greenhouse gases, which means the ocean, has gotten a degree or so Celsius hotter, which means fish are leaving Massachusetts, right? Lobster are that used to be so abundant in Massachusetts, it's too warm for them sometimes, so they're going further north to Maine. So we have fish moving towards the poles in search of cooler water, and that's really dangerous for fisheries, for fishermen's incomes and livelihoods. And so making sure that we rein in our greenhouse gas emissions is one of the best things we can do for supporting the fishing economy.
Yeah, so when we watch all these hurricanes that just continue to come through the Gulf of Mexico and go right to one or another or the same part of Louisiana, and then each time the meteorologist is saying, and the warmer waters of the Gulf are contributing significantly to the intensity of the storm.
Yeah.
Well, off of the coast of Massachusetts, we have the second fastest warming body of water in the world outside of the Arctic, the second fastest warming.
Yeah.
And so hurricanes are a much greater danger for us. These storms can intensify. So can you talk a little bit about that, and why does the warmer water supercharge a storm?
Yeah. It's a little bit complicated with the simple answer, to sort of use a phrase from Dr. Kate Marvel, who's a NASA climate scientist. She just describes a warm ocean as hurricane food. It just fuels the power of the storms. And, one way to think about it, one aspect of that is the evaporation, right? More water is evaporating and going up into the air, which means there's more water to come down. So the storms are not just getting stronger, they're getting wetter. And we know that we've seen like the deluges associated with some of these hurricanes, like the hurricanes that have hit Texas recently. It's just so much more water, which means, it's not only the winds, it's the flooding that cause so much damage. And so that's something that is a big risk. And one of the elements of the Blue New Deal concept is thinking about how can we make our coastal communities safer from storms in advance? How can we help them adapt? How can we help them become more resilient? How can we think about, how to live with the changes that scientists are telling us are coming, as opposed to ignore them and sort of just like hope for the best when we know that the storms are going to keep coming. So we need to figure out how to prepare more thoroughly for what's to come.
Yeah. So when Joe Biden, in his climate plan, which I think has been informed, I think it's been informed by the Green New Deal and the Blue New Deal.
I think so too.
I do too. All issues go through three phases: political education, political activation, political implementation. But I think this whole presidential debate has been pretty educational for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they realize now how important this is as an issue to younger people. And in my race for the Senate just last month, it was at the top of the list of under 35-year-olds. They were absolutely obsessed with it. I think I won by like 70-30 amongst under 35-year-olds, and climate was at the top of the list. And so it has injected itself into the political process. Thank goodness this time.
Yeah, finally.
We actually had 11 minutes of debate between Trump and Biden over climate in that crazy debate that went on. Actually, I'll tell you a little story. They were not going to have climate as a subject, so they released Chris Wallace the 5 subjects. So I got 36 senators to sign on to a letter with me, and I sent it to the debate commission, and basically said it's a disgrace. They didn't have any questions in 2016, and now in 2020 you're not going to have any questions as well. So they added it on that day, the day of the debate.
Doing that.
11 minutes, yeah. So that and we need it. We need it to happen over and over again. And in the Biden plan, this $2 trillion plan, which he has released, there's going to be a lot of infrastructure money. And that infrastructure money can be used along the coastline. But it's also ultimately going to include the funding for the wind, for the solar, for the plug-in hybrids, for the charging stations, that are going to be needed in order to move to an all non-greenhouse gas emitting electrical generation and transportation sector. So we can see that it's in there, but a lot of money are being spent along the coastlines.
Yeah.
And those will be big, like you're saying, CCC, not Civilian Conservation Corps, but Climate Corps. We're going to have a lot of work that we have to do to protect what is already loaded into the atmosphere
Yeah.
in terms of its
Yeah.
impact on the coastline. So can you talk about that as a phenomenon that we just have to get real about in terms of the protection of what has already happened and what its implications are for the coast?
Absolutely. So what you've described is, what I like to think of as a race to the top in terms of climate policy, right? In the Democratic primary, we had all these candidates arguing about who had the best climate plan. I mean, you've been waiting for this moment for decades, right?
Really?
Finally, right? To have, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Jay Inslee fighting about whose climate plan is better. Like, this is the dream. Like, let's argue about that and like everybody make your plan better. And that's what we've seen over the course of the primary, right? Like Inslee championed this and really centered his campaign around that. And some of his plans get adopted wholesale by the Warren campaign. And, Bernie's advisors also now, chiming in to talk to Biden's campaign about that. And, I've had the chance to chat with the campaign about like the ocean elements of it. And so how can we bring all of the best ideas together and not argue about whose idea it was, but like whoever has the best ideas, let's carry those forward. And I think that's really exciting. And because there aren't like a lot of competing ocean, Blue New Deal plans, it's just like, no one's like, well, mine is better and yours is bad. It's just like, everyone's like, yeah, let's pull these elements in and make them happen. And there's a lot in there around shipping and how we're going to change the shipping industry, because it's as it is right now, it's like emitting a lot of greenhouse gases at the ports and in the shipping process itself. And I think, Joe Biden's plan is actually shockingly good. Like a lot of, like I read it and I was like, this is legit. Like we can work with this. Like this is getting us really far close to where we need to be, especially when it comes to the justice element that you mentioned, which sort of mashes up with the question of how do we adapt. So of all of that money going to infrastructure and adapting to climate change, he's committed to 40% of that going to marginalized communities, to communities of color, to make sure that the people who have been left behind so many times don't get left behind and continue to have to bear the brunt of climate impacts. And that is like, it's a real commitment to investing in the communities that need it.
Yeah, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when we drafted the Green New Deal, we built in 3 or 4 pages on frontline communities and communities of color, and union jobs, prevailing wage that would go to frontline communities because they've always been the most adversely affected. And then I had all the Republicans said, well, that's socialism. And then amongst Democrats, they were saying to me, why did you have to put all that stuff in? Why is that all in? And couldn't you just kept it over here? The science says it's bad. Let's do wind and solar and all electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids and battery storage technologies and energy efficiency. Why do you have to go to that? Well, after the coronavirus, after George Floyd, people don't think it's so radical anymore. Now people think, well, how did you know? 1/3 of the entire document beyond that, right?
Yeah.
And thank goodness, it's in the Joe Biden plan, and that 40% of the money will be spent in those communities.
It's
and
so
that was not on the scoreboard on February 7th, 2019, when we introduced it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
I'm sorry.
The Green New Deal resolution like really changed the game, right? Like you raised the bar. Like that was the new like gold standard. And, the select committee on the climate crisis having, being forced to release their report that basically called for, the need for really strong legislation and your work on that resolution set a lot of things in motion. So it really has been an honor to support your campaign and
thank you.
to cheer you on and to donate. We have to put our money where our mouth is. Unfortunately, we don't have publicly funded elections in the US. So so we each get to chip in. And I wanted to thank you for your leadership. I mean, I refer to you as like the OG of federal climate policy. And, it was, so many of us were really worried when you were, in a tight primary there for a bit. And it's just such a joy to see you come through that so strongly, and because of your work on climate, because people appreciated how important that was to
Well,
have you.
I was the author of the appliance efficiency standards to increase the efficiency of air conditioning and
Now
refrigeration.
there's a sexy bill.
You know what? It avoided the need for 200 coal burning plants. It's working
Wow.
smarter, not harder. My mother would
Yeah.
always say, Eddie, you have to learn how to work smarter, not harder, or your father and I are going to donate your brain to Harvard Medical School as a completely unused human organ. And that's what energy efficiency is. That's what wind offshore is. All these,
The threat.
these existing industries, they work too hard. It's like they create more problems than they solve with our health, with asthmas, with the pollution that they put into the atmosphere. So I did the fuel economy standards in 2007 that Obama used to go to 54.5 miles per gallon. That's when I was the chair of the original Select Committee on Energy Independence and Climate Change from 07 to 10. And then we did the Waxman-Markey bill, which was an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. So that was big at the time, and we passed it through the House, 219, 212. It stalled out in the Senate, 4 votes short of the 60 votes that they needed. So what I did was I actually called up Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez after she was elected, and I said, let's have lunch. So we sat in the senatorial dining room for like 2.5 hours, and we talked about, in December of 2018, drafting a Green New Deal. And I had a 1,400-page bill that I got passed in 2009, but that's not what we needed. That was an effort working from the inside out. And what I suggested was this time we have to move from the outside in. We need a movement. We need to unleash all the political potential which is out there. So it's 14 pages, like you're saying, that everyone here can just read in 5 minutes. And it outlines all of it, although oceans could have been given more attention. And
we'll get there.
It's going to be in the Biden plan, and we now have kind of all this energy around these issues, and I think I think as well a big political IOU that young people are going to be able to call in next January 20th.
Yeah,
it's not going to get sloughed off the way it was in previous years.
No, I mean the culture has shifted, right? Like the expectations are higher. You raised the bar. And we can't go back. People now have to argue why not the Green New Deal, right? Like the Green New Deal is the new thing that things are getting measured against, which is such a leap forward. I mean, the fact that Biden went from proposing early in the primary 100% renewable electricity by 2050, and his new plan says actually we can do it by 2035, right? Like, because everyone was like, that's not good enough. Like the Green New Deal is like where we need to be aiming, and so like how can we support you in getting your plan to where it needs to be? And so it's just, I think of this year as a climate election, right? I mean, this is such a big election for so many reasons. But it really is a climate election, because you know better than anyone, like we just don't have time for our federal government to like dither and tiptoe around this. Like we have to charge full steam ahead towards transforming our electricity, our transportation, our buildings, our agriculture, our manufacturing, right? Like it all has to shift. And with, it'll take a federal mobilization to make that happen at the speed that it needs to in the next decade. So that's where we need to go.
So even in each of those sections, even when AOC and I were saying 10 years, then we would underneath it say as much as is technologically feasible in 10 years. So that would make it like if we started in 2021, that would mean 100% non-greenhouse gas emitting electricity by 2031. And that was crazy. You can't do that. You'll destroy the economy. Now there's a plan from Joe Biden that's 2035, and the unions have endorsed it.
Pretty close.
Well, I think we've forced people to have to defend their realistic plans for having an infinity side next to how long you have to solve it. Now
Yeah.
you have to come to the table, like you were saying, with a plan.
Hmm.
And the more you sit down is the more you realize that if all we did was double the output of wind and solar every year for the next 10 or 12 years, we're there.
We can get there. Yeah.
We're there.
And I think, what people are finally starting to think through a bit more is what happens if we don't do this? So, all of the arguments, it's too expensive, it's too disruptive. If anything, we've seen this year, not addressing climate change is extremely costly in terms of floods and fires and droughts and heat waves and hurricanes. Like, that's expensive. That's way more expensive than wind turbines and solar panels, right? And regenerative farming. And so often people think about like, it costs too much to address climate change. And I think we can never say that it costs too much unless we're also talking about what inaction is costing us. It's costing people their lives, it's costing people their homes, it's costing people their jobs. Just with the fires and hurricanes alone, and thinking about the Midwest and all of the money and jobs lost from agriculture when there's all this flooding and when the weather becomes erratic. And at the same time, Iowa and Texas are leading the nation on wind energy, right? So Massachusetts, like, let's catch you guys up. I know you're pushing for it.
And by the way, Iowa, a red, maybe the purple, the blue state this year, they have 40 to 45% of their electricity every day comes from wind.
Yeah.
And then we have people in the Northeast who still believe, oh, you can't use wind and solar because it doesn't lead to a reliable grid. And then I can say to them, well, in Iowa, how are they doing this? How do they figure this out in Iowa? Because Iowa has the single most reliable grid in the United States of the 50 states. And
Yeah.
it's want to know how they do it? They make money doing it. They pay farmers to put these wind turbines up besides the cows. They make extra money, and all of a sudden, it's no longer impossible. It's like a money making, job creation engine. And
Yeah.
so I think we've crossed into a new world right now, as you're saying, and I'm very, very, very hopeful that we win this election because what I say, Doctor, is that honestly, um, if Trump wins a second term, it's like a death sentence for the planet
Mm-hmm.
because we will have lost 8 years and the rest of the world will have as well. And that we absolutely, have to win this election. So maybe you could finish up here by just telling everyone
Yeah.
why they should go out and work for Joe Biden and
Yeah.
Kamala Harris, why it's so important for the.
It is it is critical. I mean, Trump is pulling the United States out of the Paris Agreement, the international, UN commitment for every country to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We've lost our ability to be a world leader on the topic if we're not participating in that. Um, we've, the administration has rolled back 100 environmental regulations in the past 4 years. They have, been opening up our public lands to oil and gas drilling. They have been permitting every pipeline they can as fast as they can. They've been investing in the fossil fuel industry instead of just letting it phase out. And that's really dangerous because, as you described, we have the solutions we need. We have the technology we need. There are other things we could be doing. And when we invest in economic recovery and relief packages, when we think about what that looks like, we can use those dollars to invest in building the renewable, regenerative future that we want. There's so much potential there. So please, everyone, vote, get everyone to vote. I've been saying vote climate and for at the presidential level, absolutely. But for your senators, for your representatives, for your state officials, for your city council. I mean, these are the people who are deciding if we're investing in public transit, if we have municipal composting programs, if we have bike lanes, if we have energy efficiency in our building codes. All of this matters up and down the ballot. So I hope that people will think about the climate platforms of everyone they vote for this year, but most of all, that you will exercise your right to vote and elect people who will do the work that we need them to do for us.
Thank you. I agree with you, and this is our time. We can save the planet. We can save all of creation by engaging in massive job creation. We can do this. It's all there for the asking. The #1 ocean expert in the world, Dr. Ayana Johnson.
Thank you, Senator, for having me. Such a pleasure.
No, it's an honor to have you on. Thank you.
The political tide has turned on the rising seas. We are reclaiming our leadership on the most important issue facing humankind. We can deliver a Green New Deal for America. This is an incredible moment. All of the supporters who are here today support the climate, clean energy, social justice, public health. We are talking about repairing the historic oppression of frontline and vulnerable communities, the most powerful movement organizing in the United States today. Grassroots organization. We can deliver a Green New Deal for America. We can deliver wind, solar, offshore wind. It will only be through an historic, generational commitment to end climate change that we create the kind of democracy that works for all Americans. Never in our history have the interests of all Americans been so united. I want to thank my fantastic partner, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We will save all of creation. Our energy future will not be found in the dark of a mine, but in the light